Hello everybody, this is Fun Police, and we are back again with the fourth episode of our Legion card review. In this episode, we are going to take a look at the US cards from Legion. They got a lot of stuff to fit into various archetypes. Most notably, Ramp is probably the most standout, but they got a good mix of everything. So let's just jump into it with United We Stand. It is a 1-credit order, and it says, until the start of your next turn, attacks cannot put your HQ below 1 defense. So United We Stand is a card that I sadly don't see much use for. It's important to point out that this is for attacks only, and it does not block orders or destruction effects or deployment effects, so those can still kill you. This leaves this as a very niche card for when there are decks that are looking to try to kill you with high attack units, which there are some, but not all decks. On top of that, you also need something to recover from that. Like notably, US doesn't have a lot of board clears if they're smacking you with like a bunch of big tanks or anything like that. So it'd be in a very specific set of nations that you have to have board clears or a lot of removal in, and I don't see this. Maybe in some sort of combo deck, but I don't think it's worth the card slot unless the meta is literally only decks that are like using units to kill you. And even then, I think it's a hard ask. So sadly, I think this is a bit of a pretty weak card and probably won't see any play. However, our next card, the 507th PIR, I think is going to see a lot of play. It is a 2-credit, 1 operation cost infantry unit. It has 2 attack, 3 health, and it has smokescreen. And then at the end of your turn, it gives a random friendly infantry unit plus 2 attack. An important thing to note is that it is able to buff itself, meaning that if it is the only infantry unit on the board, it will buff itself into a 4/3 with smokescreen that will continue to buff. That is really kind of insane. This card seems incredibly strong in an aggressive deck. Whether that is buffing your other infantry units or it's just a self-growing infantry unit on turn 2, I think both make it a really strong aggressive tool. I think one of the biggest things also is the smokescreen and high health. That makes it really hard to remove. So if you're running a lot of infantry in your deck, it is able to buff up them and sit in the support line, probably immune until, turn 5, 6, 7 when the enemy has, big board clears coming down that can kill it off. But I think it's just a very well-rounded card that fits into the majority of aggressive US decks. Granted, we haven't seen a lot of US aggro with them as the main nation as of recently. They've mostly been an ally to Germany or a couple other aggro decks, but maybe this is a card that'll help see the return of those decks. It's a pretty strong one, so I could see it being a card that can carry US aggro. But going on from that card, we have Fresh Recruits. Fresh Recruits is a 2-credit countermeasure, and it says when a friendly unit is destroyed, give a random friendly unit +2/+3. Fresh Recruits is very similar to Supply Shipment, which is a US order that gives a unit in the front line +2/+3 for 2 credits. This one is a different condition, and you do have to rely on the enemy to do this, but I think that in the right deck, it could have its uses. A notable thing is that you can buff units in the support line with this, and it is also able to buff anything. So my thought is some sort of artillery deck could probably benefit from this. The Soviet US artillery decks don't want this because of them using war production, but if there is some other sort of artillery deck that we see crop up, I think that Fresh Recruits could maybe find its way into that list. It just makes artillery significantly harder hitting and also way harder to remove. If this goes on like a 1/3, that's a 3/6 artillery, that they're going to have to deal with, which is quite a scary proposition. However, outside of that, outside of decks that are either like bomber heavy or artillery heavy, I don't see much of a reason to run this. I think you'd run supply shipment first if you're running a lot of infantry and tanks, because those units are going to want to be in the front line. I guess there is also one other place, is that if you have a lot of guards, fresh recruits could be quite a scary card, where you play down some guards and then they just get buffed by fresh recruits while in the support line, making them harder and harder to deal with. But it just doesn't seem like that all lines up, especially since this is a countermeasure. I just don't think it's going to see much play, sadly. Outside of maybe a couple copies in some sort of U.S. artillery deck, I'm just not seeing it. But moving on from that, we have the SB2C Helldiver. The Helldiver is a 2-credit, 2-operation cost bomber. It has 2 attack and 2 health, and it says when you gain an extra credit slot, add a copy of this unit to your hand. So it's important. One thing to note that I've seen some confusion on is that the Helldiver, having played with it now, the Helldiver works with each credit you gain. So if you gain, for example, if you use a card like War Bonds, which gains you 2 credit slots, the Helldiver will actually add 2 copies of the card to your hand, which is quite a powerful effect. I think the Helldiver is very interesting as a sort of very different sort of card than you normally see in Ramp. Ramp is all about getting to these big units and playing out these big single powerful units, but the Helldiver instead is a card you want to be swarming the board with, and that's something that US Ramp decks haven't really had before, which I think is actually a really interesting thing and might give this a niche as a very different threat depending on the meta. If the meta, because most decks when playing Ramp will use their board clears to deal with just 1 or 2 of your big bombers or your big fighters or whatever, and they will essentially be able to waste that. And then late game, the Helldiver not only does 2 things. It gives your Ramp cards more use. By making all the Ramp cards essentially draw more Helldivers, you potentially get extra value out of your cards in the late game, and then you also can punish people that are a bit too loose with their board clears and suddenly just have this seemingly endless swarm of 2/2 bombers, which 1 or 2 of them on their own probably isn't that much of a threat, but if you have 4 of them on the board every turn, that could be quite annoying to deal with. I think this is a very interesting card, and I think maybe the best use is to just run 1 or 2 copies in as a late game threat. You mostly plan on this being a late game threat, although it being a 2-drop means you can play it out on turn 2, which is better than something like a B-17, which you're not going to be able to play, if you need something early. So I think the Helldiver is really interesting, and I'm very curious as to whether Ramp decks will adopt it as like an addition, as a unique threat to their deck, or if they're going to just stick with their normal big end game threats. It is also notable that you could potentially use this in a bomber deck. It is kind of a cheap bomber, so you could potentially buff this up to, you could synergize this with something like the P-38 Lightning, which is that 3/5 fighter that gives your bombers +2 attack, and combine it with like British decks, and then you have like a bomber Ramp deck or something like that. Could be interesting. I don't think good, but could be something to try out. But on to the next card, we have the 1st Texas Infantry. It is a 3-credit, 2-operation cost 1/1. And it has the text, double attack and defense when you gain an extra credit slot. So that is potentially very powerful text. This thing, if you could buff it up quite quickly, gets very big very quickly, because it exponentially grows. However, I think that it is weak enough that we're not going to really see it played outside of like for fun decks, because it starts off very slow. You know, it only gets +1/+1 for the first time you gain a credit, but then it gains +2/+2, meaning it's a 4/4 for the first 2 credits you gain, and then finally it becomes like an 8/8 and then a 16/16. But we're talking about gaining 3 to 4 extra credit slots in order to get it there. And granted, there is the ability to buff it, which makes it very, very grow a lot faster, but that seems like a lot of work for a slow-moving infantry that probably is just going to get bounced or killed by some hard removal. So I sadly don't see much use for this, outside of maybe outside of generating some raids from new players as a card that is impossible to deal with because they made it a 16/16 in one turn, you know, and I don't run removal. But, you know, outside of that, I'm not seeing it. The next card is a 37mm M1 AA gun. It is a 3 credit, 1 operation cost artillery piece. It has 1 attack, 3 health, and then it has blitz. And when this unit attacks, reset the attack of the defending unit. So this makes a very interesting tool that I think we're going to see actually quite a deal of. The fact that it has blitz, I think, instantly makes it a prime candidate for the current U.S. or Soviet U.S. artillery decks. They appreciate having blitz artillery, and just being able to play this out and then buff it up and then attack with it could lead to a lot of extra burst in the mid-game and allow them to kill you even if you're keeping their board clear. So I think that in an artillery deck, this is a very easy card to slot into, as long as you can find the ally slots for it. And there is also the benefit that reset the attack is that it's able to be an anti-buff card. And I think that is its second purpose, where it is a tech card that you will run against certain decks that are looking to make really big units. In particular, I think the counteroffensive is the card that everybody thinks about when it comes to buff, and being able to reset the attack makes the card significantly less of a problem. So I think overall, a pretty solid card. I think it fits well into artillery decks, and it also has a tech card option for other decks. So pretty well rounded. I think we'll see this a fair amount. Nothing super powerful, but not bad. Then we get island hopping. Island hopping is a 3 credit order that says the enemy HQ gets, if this HQ has taken 3 or more damage this turn, a random friendly unit gets +2/+2. And just to clarify, this does mean that if you attack the enemy HQ and deal 3 or more damage from any source, that could be orders or units or whatever, then it gives one of your units +2/+2. I think island hopping is very, very strong. Island hopping gives you significant amounts of extra stats for a low operation cost, or for a low initial investment. And the reason why is that I think is that when we see aggressive US decks, they aren't hyper aggressive usually. They occasionally are with something like the US Italian L6 aggro deck, but I think even island hopping fits there. But most of the time, most US aggressive decks are almost mid-range in their capacity, still looking to definitely kill you quickly, but often running, you know, some more expensive cards and being able to take a slow turn or two and just keep fighting even well past the time of many other decks. They have a strong resilience in them. And I think island hopping fits that bill very well. Island hopping is able to quite effectively come down on a slow turn, but then make up for itself in dividends by almost every turn, probably providing you with +2/+2. US also has a lot of blitz cards, meaning that it's not hard to get to have no board but still activate the effect, you know. The first card I think of is the M18 Hellcat, which is the 4/2 blitz for 3 credits. That is quite a powerful card, and it goes from a 4/2 to a 6/4, which is significantly harder to deal with. You know, and there's always the potential that you just have the board and you're constantly buffing your units up. I think island hopping is pretty insane, and I think we're going to see it a lot in the upcoming meta. I guess the only limiting factor is that it is an elite, so you have to be playing US as a main nation. So I guess if we don't see any aggressive decks in the US, but I think there's going to be one somewhere, some way. I think island hopping is, between island hopping and the PIR, I think they got really strong cards that are going to buff up their potential a lot. Then we move on to the P40K. It is a 3-credit, 2-operation cost, 3/3 fighter. And it has a text: when a friendly bomber is destroyed, destroy a random enemy unit. So essentially, this card gives all of your bombers a destruction effect of the 6-credit Corsair. The Corsair F4U1D, which is a 4/4, and it says destruction, destroy a random enemy unit. And that card is quite powerful. However, I do see a bit of a problem with the P40K in that it's only a 3/3, and it has to be on the board in order to activate that effect. Bombers are not the best at killing themselves, so the P40K could struggle because you just play it down and then the enemy just kills it, and then your bombers aren't going to be killing any of their things. I think that's my biggest issue with it, and I think it makes that trying to do something like this, I think it makes it overall a bit of a clunky effect. Granted, if you can get it to go off once or twice, that is pretty insane. I mean, even once is really strong, you know. You got a 3/3 fighter that destroyed a random enemy unit. That's a death from above staple on top of it, you know, and it kind of protects your bombers. So it's hard to say. I think there is like some sort of theme of small bombers going on, but I don't know. It's a difficult thing to say if this is going to work. I think overall the P40K is just going to maybe fall a little short. I don't think the pieces are there for it to work right now. It's a bit too clunky with the current set. Maybe if there's more cheap bombers, or maybe if we have ways to kill bombers or something, I could see this. But for right now, I don't know if this really fits in anywhere. Then we got the 26th Infantry Regiment. It is a 4-credit, 1-operation cost, 4/4, and it has the text, and it is an infantry, and then it has the text, has +2 attack for each adjacent unit. So if you have 2 units next to this is an 8/4 infantry for 4 credits. And that may seem well stated, and it definitely is, but this is a slow card. It's an infantry. It doesn't have the greatest amount of health. So sadly, I think this is mostly a draft card. Maybe on a budget you could use this as a mid-game threat, but even then I think there's better options. I don't see it. I don't think there's really a justifiable deck that would want a slow infantry like this. So I think this is mostly a draft card. And in draft, it seems pretty good, but otherwise, In Hour of Need is our next card. It is a 4-credit order, and it has the text, gain 2 extra credit slots. So this is, I think, a very big card for US Ramp. Previously, Ramp has to go on turn 2 War Machine, and then they'd get 4 credits on their next turn, and then on their third turn, or on the next turn, for 5 credits, you'd play War Bonds. This means you often had to put something in the 4-drop slot or do something rather than just being able to more quickly ramp. And In Hour of Need now changes that. You can go War Machine into Hour of Need into something like Carpet Bombing, which just so happens to be 7 credits, which is what In Hour of Need puts you at, which is quite powerful. I think this is going to be a very common card. It competes, I think, directly with War Bonds for slots. War Bonds is arguably a bit better in the late game, as it draws you an extra card on top of it. But I think In Hour of Need potentially does more in the early game, where that extra credit slots works. It also is arguably a bit better with stuff like the Helldiver or the Texas Infantry, as it is a cheaper way to gain 2 credit slots, which double activates them. And although that is a bit minor, I think that just the simple fact that this is like fixing the curve of ramp could be a big thing for the deck. You can very quickly get into your late game cards now instead of having to take an awkward turn off after your first war machine in order to do something before war bonds. So I think an Hour of Need is a very strong card and is going to see a good amount of play in US ramp. It may even push out war bonds entirely, but I think that remains to be seen. Then, our second to last card is, I would say, probably the strongest US card, the PB4Y2 Privateer. The Privateer is a 5-credit, 2-operation cost bomber. It is a 4/4. It has heavy armor 1, and it has the text, it costs the enemy plus 2 credits to target or attack this unit. So that is quite a powerful effect. Taxing the enemy to pay 2 more if they target this with any order, or a deployment effect, or even something like a unit, means that this thing is actually really annoying to deal with. This is potentially very powerful and very sticky. It is weak to orders that don't have to target, but there's only a handful of those in the game, like Death from Above. But the Privateer, when it comes down, the enemy's going to have to probably pay, at least like 5 or 6 credits to remove it, even with an removal order. Like, it's just that extra plus 2 is quite a lot. I think this could be a very strong innate. I think this is a reasonable card in ramp. Very annoying, very cheap to come down, but still applying good pressure. It's a bit slow, but ramp can play it out early, so that is not as much of a problem. And on top of that, I also think that mid-range US decks love this card. In particular, Bolster probably adores this card. Bolster loves its units that are hard to interact with, and this has 2 operation cost, it's a bomber, and it's hard to deal with. I think this is like a perfect card that slits right into the Bolster decks, which have sadly fallen off as of recent times as the meta kind of warped around a couple things. But I think that the PB4Y2 Privateer is one of the strongest US card to come out of this expansion. And I will be shocked if it doesn't see play. I think it is extremely strong. And the final card is another very strong card, Stars and Stripes. It is a 5-credit order, and it says deal 1 damage to each unit in the enemy support line for each unit there. So if the enemy has 2 units in the support line, this deals 2 to both of them. If they have 3 units in the support line, they will take 3 each. If they have 4, they will take 4 each. A very strong card in my opinion. The US currently only has a single board clear in strategic bombing, but now they have 4 more cards like that to use. The Germany has a card Eagle Claws, which is similar to this. It's 3 credits to deal 2 into the support line, but I think the fact that this scales up to 4 attack is actually quite massive. That kills almost everything in the support line, and really could mess with the certain decks. Like, for example, this is just an instant board clear against artillery, and if you are running like several copies of this, they're never going to be able to stick more than 1 or 2 artillery. So I think this card is very likely going to see play at least a few copies in ramp. US is just going to like having board clears. It doesn't deal to the front line, so I don't think you're going to run that many copies. But I think it's entirely reasonable that we're going to see a few copies of this alongside strategic bombing as a late game AoE package. There's just a lot it hits, and I think this is a very effective card, and we're going to see it a lot. But with that said, that is the US cards. We got, I think overall, there are 2 decks that got by far the most out of this. Ramp got the Helldiver, Texas Infantry, In Hour of Need, and Stars and Stripes. But I think there's also a Bolster or otherwise aggressive deck list, which got the 507th PIR, the Island Hopping, and the PBY Privateer. Uh, Artillery also got a card with the 37mm and maybe fresh recruits, but I'm kind of hesitant on that. And then we got some interesting cards like United We Stand and the P40. But overall, I think I think we're going to see Ramp get a lot of tools and become a lot more potent in its effects. Whether that's the Helldiver making more effects in Hour of Need, smoothing the curve out, Stars and Stripes just being like AoE in a deck that normally doesn't have that much AoE or has to rely on an ally for AoE. So I expect US to gain some more footing with a ramp theme, and maybe we'll see an aggro deck pop up around the 507th and island hopping. Those are very strong cards, I think, and I'm going to be surprised if we don't see decks that are trying to use them alongside other cards. But that is going to be all for this video. If you enjoyed, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We're going to cover the Japanese next, and then after that one, we will finish it off with the allied nations, including the new Poland. So make sure not to miss that. We'll probably have them up later today. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and have a good day.